I'm 86 now, and the winters don't visit me the way they used to. They used to roar down from the ridges, swallowing the sky, howling through the pines like old gods searching for something they'd lost. But that winter of '53, Lord, that one came to stay. The kind that pressed silence into the bones of a boy and taught him that mercy can sometimes sound like a broken breath in the dark. I was 16, tending what was left of my father's homestead after he passed the spring before. We had 10 acres of frost and sorrow, a handful of chickens, and a barn that leaned with the weight of years. Nights were the hardest, wood snapping in the stove, wind whistling through every crack, my mother gone to her sisters in town. I told her I'd manage alone. Truth was, I couldn't bear the noise of grief in another's house. Out here, even loneliness had an order to it. The snow that year fell thicker than I'd ever seen. By December, it was waist-high, turning fences into white humps, swallowing the path to the creek. The sky hung low and gray, like it wanted to touch the earth and give up. I'd spend my days chopping wood, checking the traps near the frozen ravine, and trying not to think about how small I'd become in a world that had stopped speaking. One night, I went out with my lantern to check a snare that hadn't come back full in days. The cold bit so deep it felt like glass inside my lungs. The forest was silent, no owls, no fox cry, just the groan of trees under snow. Halfway down the slope, I saw it, blood, black in the lantern light, painting the snow in uneven strokes. I followed the trail, heart thumping against my ribs like something trapped. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong to any deer or bear I'd ever known. A moan, low and guttural, half-human. My hand went cold around the lantern's handle. The light trembled across a tangle of fallen branches and barbed wire left from my father's old fence. There, half buried in snow, was a creature so massive it bent the air around it. It was covered in thick, matted hair the color of wet bark, one leg twisted unnaturally beneath it. Its chest rose shallowly, breath rasping through blood and ice. I should have run. Every inch of me screamed to run. But then its eyes opened, amber, wet with pain, and they found me like it knew me, like it was asking something wordless. I stood there for what felt like a lifetime. The forest pressed in, breathless. I could hear my father's voice from some far place. If a thing's suffering, you ease it, boy. You don't turn away. So I dropped to my knees. My gloves stuck to the blood-frozen wire as I pulled it free from the creature's leg. It didn't fight. Just breathed, deep and shuddering, and when I spoke softly, "It's all right, it's all right," its gaze softened like a dying ember finding light again. I couldn't drag it far. It was too heavy, too human in its weight. So I fetched the sled from the barn, heart hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. Every time the runners scraped the ice, I winced, afraid the sound would break whatever fragile peace held between us. By the time I hauled it into the barn, my hands were bleeding through my mittens. The smell hit me first, iron, wet fur, earth. It filled the barn like a storm cloud. I laid it on a bed of straw, shaking so hard the lantern danced shadows along the rafters. Its leg was a mess of flesh and wire. I poured whiskey on the wound and it howled, a sound that rattled my bones. I whispered to it the way my father used to whisper to dying calves, low and steady, until the noise softened to a whimper. All through the night, I sat by the stall, watching its chest rise and fall. Sometimes it stirred, eyes rolling toward me, and I'd murmur something, anything, to keep it tethered to this world. I gave it water from a tin cup, and though it spilled most of it, the attempt felt like an offering. When dawn came, pale and thin through the cracks, I saw it staring at me, really staring, and I felt something shift inside me. Fear, yes, but also a strange, aching tenderness. Days blurred. I fed it scraps, rabbit stew, cornbread, even apples I'd been saving. It healed slow, but I could see strength returning. Sometimes it made sounds in its throat, not quite words but not animal either. I talked to it like I would a person. Told it about my father's death, about the land going to ruin, about how quiet everything had become. And it would just listen, head tilted as if it understood. Outside, the world was buried deeper. The nearest town was 15 miles away and unreachable. For weeks, it was just me, the wind, and the secret breathing in my barn. Once, a blizzard howled so fierce I thought the roof would lift clean off. I went to check on it and found it shivering, its eyes pleading. So I sat close, wrapped a blanket over its chest, and felt its heat like a forge under my palm. Its heart was steady, louder than my own. When the storm broke, I found footprints around the barn, massive, bare, unlike anything human. I wiped them away with a branch, my stomach twisting with a new kind of fear. What if someone saw? What if they came looking? I started keeping the lanterns dim and the doors locked. At night, I'd hear it breathe and wonder if I'd crossed into a story the world wasn't meant to hear. By mid-February, the wound had sealed, leaving a pale scar. I opened the barn one morning and found it standing, taller than any man, head brushing the rafters. Sunlight caught in its fur like threads of copper. It looked at me, then down at the open door. For a heartbeat I thought it might stay. Instead, it stepped into the snow, slow and deliberate, leaving deep prints that glowed blue in the cold light. It paused at the treeline, turned back, and let out a sound that wasn't quite a growl or a word, something between farewell and thanks. I wanted to speak, to ask its name, but my throat closed around the moment. It vanished into the trees, swallowed by white. For days I couldn't shake the silence it left behind. I'd wake at night thinking I heard its breath in the barn, but it was only the wind. I buried the blood-stained straw, scrubbed the floor, tried to pretend the world had returned to normal. It hadn't. The forest felt alive now, watching me. I'd walk to the creek and swear I saw shapes moving between the pines, tall, patient, waiting. When the thaw came, the world opened its eyes again. The snow receded, the creek sang, and the air smelled of wet earth and rot. Life crept back, but I didn't. Something of me had stayed behind in that winter. I still set food out some nights, habit, maybe faith. Each morning it was gone. Spring rolled over the valley like a slow forgiveness. The land healed, but my heart didn't. I'd stand at the barn door, lantern in hand, and wonder if I'd dreamed it all. But then I'd see the scar in the wood where its claw had grazed the beam, and I'd know the truth hadn't gone anywhere. I never spoke of it. Not to the preacher who came that Easter, not to the traders passing through. Some truths can't stand daylight, they live in the hush between breaths. Years later, when the snows returned and I was older, the forest gave me a sign. I was mending a fence under a bruised sky when I heard it, 3 heavy knocks on the cabin door. Slow, deliberate. The sound rolled through me like thunder from another life. And that was the night I realized the woods hadn't forgotten me after all. The years passed quiet as moss growing over a stone. I built my life small, hidden between the folds of the Appalachian woods, where memory could rest without being seen. By 1973 I was 36, a man shaped by silence. My hands were rough from splitting wood and fixing traps, my heart rougher still from living half inside the world and half inside a secret that had never stopped breathing in me. People came and went in town, new faces, new cars, voices that rose and fell with the times, but I stayed. They said I was a recluse, maybe a little strange. I let them. It was safer that way. The fewer eyes on me, the fewer chances the truth had to slip. For 20 years I'd carried that night like a wound that never healed right. Sometimes, when the wind turned cold and the pines swayed, I'd think I heard that same low breath behind me, the echo of something that once trusted me. I married once, briefly. Her name was Helen, a schoolteacher who came to the valley with big city eyes and hands that smelled of ink and soap. She said my silence had weight to it, like I'd been listening to the world too long. I told her she wasn't wrong. But the marriage didn't hold. You can't share a life with someone when half your heart belongs to something you can't explain. She left after 2 winters, her note pinned to the door with my father's hunting knife. I never took the knife out. The forest, though, it stayed. It aged with me. Trees that were saplings in '53 now towered over the ridges. The creek cut deeper into the rock. Every spring I rebuilt the fences and mended the roof, but I never touched the old barn. Some nights I'd find myself standing there without remembering how I'd walked that far, listening to the timbers creak in the wind. Once I thought I saw a shadow pass behind the slats, tall and fluid. My chest filled with a kind of panic that felt almost like hope. It was the summer of '73 when the forest finally answered me. I was hauling firewood near dusk, sweat running down my back when the world went still. The birds stopped mid-song. Even the creek seemed to hush. That's when I saw it, just beyond the clearing, half hidden by fern and fog. Older now, grayer, the fur around its muzzle streaked with silver. One arm hung lower, like an old injury hadn't healed right. But the eyes, those eyes were the same. I dropped the axe without thinking. The moment stretched so long it felt like time was holding its breath. Then it stepped forward, limping slightly, and let out a sound low in its chest, not a growl, not a warning, something that trembled like recognition. I didn't move. I didn't dare. Slowly, Ash raised a hand and touched its chest, then gestured toward me. I did the same. It made a rumbling noise, soft, pleased, and then set down a small bundle at my feet. A rabbit, freshly killed, still warm. A gift. A memory come full circle. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing its face in the firelight, the intelligence there, the weariness. I'd spent 20 years trying to forget, and now here it was, walking back into my life like the forest had kept our secret for us both. But secrets don't stay quiet forever. In the years that followed, Ash came often. Sometimes it would stand at the edge of the yard at dusk, waiting until I brought food. Other times I'd find small offerings, fish, carved sticks, stones stacked in strange little towers. We built a rhythm that felt older than language. We never touched, not after that first time, but there was an understanding between us. Gratitude, caution, something that lived between fear and love. I started keeping notes in an old journal, sketches mostly, marks of its height, its gait, the way it favored its left side. I'd read about cryptids in magazines, the scientists who called men like me fools. I wondered what they'd say if they could see those amber eyes look back at them without malice. But the thought always curdled into dread. Because I knew what would happen if anyone found Ash. The world doesn't study what it fears, it destroys it. By 1987, rumors started. Men in suits came through the valley with trucks and rifles, saying they were surveying for new roads. But I saw the cages in the back of their trucks. I saw the tranquilizer darts. They asked questions about strange noises, missing livestock, lights in the woods. I told them nothing. That night, I burned the journals. The flames licked up years of memories, and for a moment, I thought I saw Ash's shadow move in the glow, watching from the trees. Then came the gunshot. It was a week later, during a storm that split the sky open. I found blood by the creek, dark, thick, and too much to belong to a deer. I followed it, heart pounding against the rain, until I reached the old cave where I'd first hidden it all those years ago. Inside, huddled and shaking, was Ash. Its shoulder was torn open, the flesh raw. When it saw me, it didn't move to flee. It just closed its eyes as if it had been waiting. I did what I'd done as a boy. I cleaned the wound, used what whiskey I had left to keep it clean, whispered the same words, "It's all right, it's all right." It made small sounds, softer now, like a child mumbling in sleep. I stayed by its side for days, feeding it broth, changing the bandages. And when it finally lifted its head to look at me, I swear it smiled. Not like a man smiles, but in that deep, knowing way only something ancient can. Those weeks were the closest I ever came to peace. I'd bring food at dusk, and we'd sit near the mouth of the cave, watching the light die through the trees. Sometimes it would hum, a deep vibration that felt like the earth itself singing. I started talking again, not to people but to it. About the years I'd lost, about Helen leaving, about how I'd become a ghost in my own life. It would tilt its head, listening, as though it understood every word. But secrets have gravity. They pull you down the longer you hold them. One evening I came back to find boot prints near the cave. Government men again, or maybe hunters. I felt the panic rise, thick and choking. I begged Ash to leave, to go deeper into the hills. It looked at me for a long time before reaching out, placing its hand on my chest. Then it turned and vanished into the dark, swallowed by mist and rain. I waited weeks, months. I left food in the usual places, but it never came. The silence returned, heavier than before. I tried to live as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't. The woods had eyes again, and I felt them every time I stepped outside. I knew what I'd done, what I'd unleashed by caring. I had saved it once, but now the world was closing in, and my secret had become a burden I couldn't lay down. The years rolled forward. 1993, 1998, 2001. My hair turned silver. My hands shook when I lit the stove. I'd hear news about creatures spotted in the mountains, blurry photographs, frightened voices on radios. I knew none of them had seen him. Not really. The world was still guessing, still hunting shadows. I built a small cabin closer to the creek where we first met, just to be near the place. Some nights, when the fog came in heavy, I'd light a lantern and set it by the window. I'd imagine that somewhere out there, Ash saw that faint light and remembered too. Once, in the dead of winter, I woke to find footprints by the door, huge, deliberate, half filled with snow. My heart stopped. I opened the door to nothing but wind. But on the porch sat a stone. Smooth and dark, carved with a single line down the center, like an old scar. I knew what it meant. He was still out there, but time was catching us both. That night, I sat by the fire, the stone warm in my palm. The flames flickered and bent, and for a moment, I could almost see him sitting across from me again, that slow rise and fall of his chest. I didn't know then that the next time I saw him would be the last. The winters don't bite the way they used to, but they still find their way into my bones. I'm 86 now, and this cabin feels more like a memory than a home. The wood creaks when I breathe. The kettle whistles too long before I remember to lift it. Most days, I just sit by the window and watch the snow fall the same way it did 70 years ago. Slow, deliberate, as if the sky still remembers that first night I carried a wounded secret into my father's barn. The world has changed. Satellites hum above the clouds. Men with machines strip the mountains bare. The forest that raised me has thinned to half its size, but it still knows me. Sometimes, when the wind moves just right, I swear it carries the sound of footsteps. Heavy, patient, older than time itself. That sound has followed me through every season of my life, a promise kept in silence. I thought I'd made peace with the ghost. Thought I could die without ever seeing him again. But peace is a fragile thing. It doesn't last when the past starts to breathe again. It was late autumn of 2023 when it began. The kind of cold that tastes of iron and wood smoke. I'd gone to bed early, the lantern still burning low, when I heard it, a hollow thud outside, followed by another, then a third. My heart stalled. It wasn't a knock this time. It was heavier, slower. Something dragging through the snow behind the barn. I lit the lantern and stepped out, the night swallowing the light almost instantly. The trees loomed tall and quiet, their branches heavy with frost. And then I saw it, just a shadow at first, hunched against the apple tree that had long since stopped bearing fruit. The snow around it was darkened, disturbed. My breath caught. Even after all the years, I knew that shape. He was smaller somehow, or maybe I'd just grown old enough to see him differently. His fur was silvered through, his chest sunken, breath rattling like the last notes of a song. I took one step toward him and felt my knees weaken. He looked up. The eyes were still there, amber, deep, filled with something that lived beyond words. Recognition. I went to him slowly, my hand trembling in the lantern's glow. He didn't move, just watched, his breath a faint cloud. When I knelt beside him, the smell of earth and age filled the air. He was hurt, too thin, too frail. His hand, rough and scarred, reached out and brushed my coat as if to make sure I was real. I held it. 70 years of silence collapsed in that one touch. "You found your way home," I whispered. My voice cracked under the weight of it. He made a sound low in his throat, something like a sigh. I pulled the old quilt from my shoulders and wrapped it around him. The snow kept falling, gathering in his fur like starlight. His eyes followed me, tired but unafraid. I spoke to him the way I had as a boy, quiet and steady, words that meant nothing except that I was there. He listened. He always had. I could see it then, the years written across both of us. My hands spotted and trembling, his fur thinning, scars tracing every muscle. The world had tried to erase us both, but we had outlasted it. Two relics bound by a promise no one else could understand. I stayed with him until dawn. The lantern burned low, its flame flickering against the frost. I told him about everything he'd missed. The highways, the noise, the men who still searched for him in stories they'd never believe. I told him about Helen, about how she'd once asked me what I was keeping from her, and how I'd said, only the truth. I told him I was sorry, for the world, for the bullets, for the time I couldn't protect him. He reached up, fingers curling weakly around my wrist, and met my gaze. There was something there, something heavy and old, a sadness too deep for language. And then he made a sound I'll never forget. It wasn't human, not fully, but the meaning was clear. It was gratitude, farewell, forgiveness. The sun began to rise, pale and cold, turning the snow gold. His eyes followed the light as though he remembered it from a kinder world. Then, with one long breath, his chest stilled beneath my hand. The forest went silent. Even the wind held its breath. I felt the warmth leave him, slow as dusk slipping behind the hills. I stayed there for hours, unable to move, my fingers still tangled in the quilt. When I finally stood, my legs gave out. I wept like a child, the sound swallowed by the trees. I buried him by the creek, beneath the pine where we'd first met. The ground was half frozen, the work brutal. Each shovel of dirt felt like it was being taken out of me. When it was done, I set a single stone on the mound, smooth, carved with that same line he'd once left on my porch. A scar for a scar. A mark to say we'd both been here. That night, I sat by the fire, the silence louder than any storm. My hands shook as I poured a glass of whiskey, and I thought about how small my world had become. Every breath felt borrowed. The cabin smelled of smoke and pine sap, of endings. I kept expecting to hear his heavy stride outside, the old rhythm of him moving through the snow. But there was only the crackle of wood and the sigh of wind through the rafters. I found the strength to record my story a few days later. Not for fame or proof, God knows the world's full of fools who wouldn't understand, but because I couldn't take the silence anymore. I needed someone, anyone, to know that once upon a winter, something beautiful and impossible had trusted a lonely boy enough to live. I spoke into the recorder like I was confessing to the earth itself. Told it everything, the wire, the barn, the cave, the storm, the 70 years of secrecy. Every word felt like lifting a stone off my chest. When I finished, I left the recorder on the table, still humming faintly, and went to the window. The snow was falling again. The forest looked endless, white and still, but I could feel him there. Not in body, something larger. In the hush between the gusts, in the way the trees leaned toward the wind. The same breath I'd once heard in the barn all those decades ago. If anyone finds this, I murmured, let him rest. He was never meant for cages or cameras. Some things are too sacred for proof. I stayed by that window until dusk. The sun dipped low, painting the snow with that soft amber light we both loved. My reflection in the glass looked thin and faded, but behind it, just for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a shape move through the pines. Tall, slow, familiar. I didn't turn away. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was memory. Or maybe the woods were just giving me one last kindness. I took the lantern and walked out to the creek one final time. The snow crunched beneath my boots, each step heavier than the last. The air stung my lungs sharp and clean. When I reached the mound, the pine above it shivered, scattering frost like glitter through the dark. I set the lantern down and whispered, "Thank you." The flame inside flickered, then steadied. I watched it until the cold took hold of my hands, until the world blurred in tears and frost. When I finally turned back toward the cabin, the forest exhaled, a long, slow breath that felt like a goodbye. I paused at the door, the light from the lantern still glowing behind me, soft as dawn. It looked, for a moment, like a star fallen to earth. And in that stillness, in that trembling half-light, I realized what he'd really given me. Not survival. Not secrecy. But a reason to stay human even when the world forgot how. The wind rose again, gentle this time, carrying through the pines the faintest echo of that voice I'd known so long ago. I closed my eyes and listened.